au quotidien. C'est sur Terre, oui.
The entire world will stream into our living rooms with the velocity of light.
Welcome to another episode of Storytelling Live. Tonight I'm wearing this lovely foofball and foof hat, of course, don't you love it? And why the hell do we wear this slanky hanky hat right about this time of year? Are we suddenly elves? Does Father Christmas ever wear something like this? Did Christ wear something like this? Where does this come from? So, well, I asked an automated robot. Thanks for the reminder. Shut down.
You don't have any reminders.
Okay.
Just to confirm, you want to power off this device.
Yes. Well, have you got yourself a beverage for tonight? Well, I hope you do. Why do we wear a long pointy red cap with the pompom and white fringe for Xmas? How did that hat get tied to Santa? So the cultural roots go back to Norse and European traditions of pointed caps. Well, we know that our good friend Ebenezer Scrooge, created by Dickens, he wore such a hat, didn't he? Folklore influence Norwegian folklore's Askeladen character with a red knit cap. Okay. And the mythological connection, the Norwegian Fjosnis, farm a gnome and spirit wearing a similar red pointed hat. So the gnomes wear this kind of hat as well. So the distinctive red pointy hat with the white fringe and pompom has multiple interesting origins. The ancient cultural inspiration pointed hats were common in Norse and European cultures, serving both practical and symbolic purposes. And these early designs laid the groundwork for the modern Santa hat. I think the Dutch Saint Nicholas, he had more of a pontiff's hat. He was much more of the hierophant, right? Wasn't he such? And folklore, the folkloric figure was a working class hero, so that's the whole thing. It's a working class hero, often doing chores, who is associated with cinders and blows on the coal to stoke the fire, typically for a grandmother or small child. But actually, Cinderella is the person who is bound to do chores, menial chores, and she is the heroine of, was that Perrault? Hey guys, as far as tonight's story goes, we have spoken so much about the purported ghost book and the purported authority of the British aristocracy and the Victorian desire to find the tales of all doctors and wealthy financiers as authoritative sources for even the most outlandish of tales. And here, at Storytelling Live, we happen to like outlandish and even, might I say, preposterous tales, which of course brings us to tonight's especially cold and wintry reading of the tale only known as The Restless Dead. And the story was taken from Blackwood's magazine for December of 1892 and republished in second collection of Lord Halifax's Ghost Book Part 2. And so it begins. 5 years before the date of this story, George Woodfall, a wealthy and respected citizen of Sydney, beloved of all classes for his uprightness and benevolence, suddenly vanished, leaving not the faintest trace. His disappearance caused the most profound sensation, and as his affairs were found to be in perfect order, foul play was for a time suspected. No clue, however, was forthcoming, and after 2 years a monument was raised to the man who had earned the right to be called a public benefactor. My name is Power, the Reverend Charles Power. I am the incumbent of the parish church of St. Chrysostom, Redfern, Sydney, and through clergymen, I've never so far been led to suspect myself of being in any way a weakling or given over to vain imaginings. I am 40 years of age and unmarried. My life has been uniformly practical, and I cannot remember to have ever been the prey of any morbid sentiment whatsoever. Hitherto, I've utterly disbelieved in apparitions of any description, regarding them as illusions presented to a temporarily, though slightly disordered brain. I am free to confess that, had I alone been the witness of the apparition herein described, I should have felt bound to set aside my own impressions as unworthy of serious attention on the grounds already stated, nor should I have further investigated the matter, and thus what is now known might never have come to light, and, for all we know, rest and peace might have been denied to a long-tortured soul. Thus much of myself. Of my friend, William Rowley, I may say that he is a man of like mind unto myself, and that, as a scientist famous throughout the world, as the man who planned and carried out the canal system of New South Wales. His education has not been such as to render him fanciful, even did his natural instincts turn in that direction, which they do not. In a word, he is hard-headed, shrewd, and an utterly unimaginative man. One thing must be stated at the outset. The exact locality in which the events here recorded have come to pass we have concealed, fearing lest some too curious hand might disturb that lonely grave among the mountains where lies all that remains of a man who, if he sinned, surely also suffered. With what amazed horror the inhabitants of the city of Sydney will learn the fate of George Woodfall, we can well imagine. When a man respected and beloved among us for 20 years departed suddenly from our midst, the whole community mourned for him as for a father. And now, when the veil is rent, and he whom we believed a saint stands revealed the opposite of all what we once conceived him to be, amazement is only natural, but lest that feeling should change in the minds of some to that of scorn, I would say, judge him not, for you know not how he was tempted. Judge him not until you have been tempted as he was, and then, if you resist, still judge him not, because of the awfulness of his doom. The actual narrative of our experiences I shall leave to William Rowley, whose powers of description, as I find on comparing our two separately compiled statements, considerably surpass my own. In the month of September last year, my friend Power and I were shaking the cobwebs from our brains and enjoying a short holiday among the mountains of the Great Dividing Range. I shall not, as Power says, indicate more clearly the precise locality to any but those who may have a personal or public right to the information. We had been out about a fortnight, and Power, who is an enthusiastic botanist, had already made several new discoveries among the Australian flora, while I, gun in hand, contented myself with bringing down that particular section of the fauna most directly concerned with our breakfast and dinner. One evening, it was the 20th, and the date is indelibly engraved upon my memory, when we were in the very heart of the lofty ranges, and we began to cast about for a spot where we could camp for the night. Not far away we could hear the thunder of a waterfall, and judging that we should find what we wanted somewhere in its vicinity, we pressed on, descending deeper and deeper into a long gully, the sides of which were thickly covered with tall trees. and tangled undergrowth. On reaching the bottom, we walked forward until we came upon a pretty glade, formed by clumps of tall tree ferns, fringing a deep pool which was formed, in part at least, by the water which poured incessantly from the heights and constituted the head of a small creek, which flowed away and was soon lost to sight among the dense foliage through which it forced its way. This was the very spot for us, and during our supper we found leisure to observe the formation of the waterfall, exactly opposite to which we reclined. It was very curious. From the top of the cliff, the water, projected by some force, the nature of which we could not divine, sprang sheer out from the brink of the precipice, and descending within a mighty and unbroken arc, poured with a never-ceasing roar upon a great ledge of rock, which jutted out some 40 feet below. Here, after being collected, as it were, in a vast reservoir, continuously overflowed and rushed down the black face of the rock in a torrent of silver foam. Scarcely had we finished our supper, and piling a few logs on the fire, lit our pipes for a yarn, then suddenly, as it seemed, the clear, starry sky became overcast. A violent gust of wind rushed shrieking through the gully, scattering our fire in all directions. Ceased, and for a few moments all was still. Then the drip, drip, fell splashing, a few heavy drops of rain, and almost before we could reach the shelter of the nearest clump of ferns, a tremendous storm burst upon us with a fury which, notwithstanding my long experience of tropical storms, I have never seen surpassed. The wind had died away, but the thunder rolled and crashed and reverberated in an awful manner, all the time writhing and coiling and darting with forked tongues about the topmost summit. Gleamed the electric fires like a multitude of blazing serpents let loose upon the blackness of the night. And from the shelter, such as it was where we crouched, Power and I watched progress of the storm. So pitchy dark had it grown that though touching, we could not see one another, and though we heard its never-ceasing rush, even above the fury of the storm, the great white mass of falling water immediately in front of us had become invisible. Suddenly, a levant streak, an archaic word for lightning, flashed out of the gloom, struck for one instant the face of the cliff with a broad blaze of light, then vanished, leaving all once more in darkness. No, not all. For through the intense blackness there arose, just in the position of the watery arc, a soft and luminous mist. Faint and shadowy at first, it rapidly increased in density, becoming clearer to the sight, till at length it hung, as it were, a great white pall, suspended between heaven and hell. Crash! And another stunning thunder roll shook the air, while again the forked flame darted its fiery shaft upon the face of the cliff. Then darkness once more, save for the misty veil, now no longer white, but suffused with a pale pink glow, delicate and fleeting as the first faint flush of dawn. Swiftly it deepened to an exquisite tint, while thousands upon thousands of rosy drops were flung hither and thither, as the spray from the ledge was splashed and dashed in all directions. But, beautiful as this was, scant time was left us to admire it. Another crash, another flash, a roaring, rumbling noise as if an earthquake was upon us, and once again the scene was changed. There was one brief interval of perfect stillness, and then, in an instant, The pink glow went out. Darkness. Well, one might draw a breath. And then a blood-red glare, so intense, so lurid, that it required but little imagination to suppose a torrent of blood descending on us where we sat. Out curved the great arc, in a vast sheet of crimson, and down the black face of the cliff poured the red stream in all manner of fantastic shapes. But now the light was not confined to the water alone, for the whole mountain glared and glowed, and the giant trees seemed to reel in desperate conflict. And then, as suddenly as it had come, the glorious display vanished, and thick darkness settled once more upon everything. Hitherto, we had watched in silence, too absorbed in the grandeur of what we saw for speech. But now I turned to Power with a light remark about our good fortune in having witnessed such a phenomenon. As I spoke, I felt him grasp my arm convulsively. "My God," he said, in a voice so unlike his own I scarcely knew it. What is that?" "What?" I exclaimed, rather startled by the tone in which he spoke. He didn't answer, but his grasp tightened on my arm. I looked in the direction of the waterfall. Heavens! What was it? Out of the gloom, high up in the midst of the arc of water, appeared a human hand. It was the hand of a dead man, long and lean, with the blue decaying flesh shriveling on the fingers, and as it waved and beckoned, another hand, withered and gruesome like itself, grew before our eyes, and the long, thin fingers twined themselves together as if in supplication. Struggling, as it were, into material shape, followed the arms, and then, as I sat, my mouth agape with horror, and every nerve tingling there in a ghastly completeness, stood a man. But what a man! He had been dead for years. On his bones, the flesh had shrunk and dried, and in some parts rotted off. It was a man, yet not a man, a skeleton, yet not a skeleton, a horrid corpse endowed with life, or at least with the semblance of life. And now a great blaze of crimson life burst forth again, and all over the figure, and about and around it seemed to flow streams of blood. The awful thing writhed and rocked in what seemed to be a deadly paroxysm of anguish, now standing erect and flinging its weird arms above its head as though invoking curses, now falling on its withered knees in agony. I could bear no more and hid my face in my hands. When I looked again, the apparition had vanished. "Power," I said, falteringly, but there was no answer. He had fainted. Let's take a little break and we'll hear from our first special guest.
وسندي لقينا ويانا وسندي القناوية خذ بيزيدك بالنية ولا يدرى بك بلك أمي ولأمي مذلي ولأمي ما شجر لي ولغرب الرزو بيالا ودت لي لا زاليها
Pretty cool, right? Yeah. Did you get a snack, or did you stay with it? Good. Good. Go get a snack now. I'll wait for you.
One day through television, the entire world will stream into our living rooms with a velocity of light.
Yeah? You got your snack? You got your delicious, comforting Christmas beverage? That's good. That's good. I don't have the regular set that I used to, you know. Things have happened. If you want details, you can write to me. You know how to get a hold of me. It's been quite a year, has it not? Did you have a... It's been a crazy year, man. It's been a crazy year. I had a crazy year. Hopefully, you guys came out all right. I think I came out all right. We asked the internet, and the internet said about the conical hat that it's worn by workers of lowly stature, but it also means it's also worn by those who go out and have great adventures. And the person who sweeps the cinders, or who blows the bellows on the fire, right? Stokes the fires. And well, fire is knowledge, and knowledge is literacy, and well, anyway. But there's no, what is this function here? What is the function of this? It would be a much more functional thing if it didn't have the pom-pom at the end. I mean, what is this? What is it for? In any case, so if you remember, we are in the middle of the mountains. in the middle of nature, hiding from a rainstorm under some palm fronds with these guys. One of them's a doctor and the other one's a lawyer, right? Yeah. Okay. Power. And, oh, no. One of them's a church man, right? And then the other one's a botanist and man of science. God forbid they should be creative, you know? Anyway, so they see this thing, and it's a corpse stepping out of a giant waterfall covered in blood. Yeah? Blood gushing everywhere. And he turned around, this guy turns around, and his friend has fainted, and he's like an inscrutable, non-creative gentleman, right? An aristocrat, no less, and a man of God, right? Yeah? So he's had enough, and he passes out. Power? I said falteringly. There was no answer. He had fainted. When he came to, the moon was again shining high in the heavens. There was no trace of the recent storm. The cataract was a broad and gleaming sheet of silver as though nothing had ever happened to disturb it. Power stretched himself, rubbed his eyes, and then sat up and looked about him in a bewildered way. At last he spoke. Rolly, he began, hesitatingly. I have had a very curious dream. I thought it best to cut him short. It was no dream, Power, I said, for I saw it too. He looked at me for a moment incredulously, then covered his face with his hands. You saw it too? He gasped. Then, my God, what can it mean? Power is a cool and remarkably self-possessed man, and before long his nerves recovered their balance, and he spoke to me again. Of one thing I am firmly convinced, he said. So terrifying a spectacle would never have been allowed to appear to us without some reason. What do you suppose it to be? Really? I answered. I have no idea, prefer not to imagine. We must go up there and try to find out. My own thought, he said, rising to his feet. Come. What now? I cried in astonishment. Surely you'll wait till morning. There's nothing to be gained by such haste, or to be lost by a little delay. That may or may not be, he replied firmly. All I know is that I'm going to try to get behind that veil of water tonight. Could you sleep? He added with a faint smile. Well, there was the possibility of that ghastly thing appearing to us again. I could not. There's not much chance of that, I admitted. To tell you the truth, I rather wish it would, for then we might arrive at some scientific explanation of it. I was so taken by surprise when the gentleman made his first appearance that Rolly, he interrupted, don't jest. We do not agree on all points, and your belief in the unseen is much weaker than I would have it. But here we have both of us had evidence of the most startling and convincing kind. Believe me, there's a meaning in this, and it is our plain duty to discover it, if we can. Let us go now, while we have the moon to light us. All right, I said, go ahead. And so we began the ascent together. There is no need to set down all the details of that weary climb. It was about 9:30 when we began it, 11 when we reached the level of the rock on which the arc of water broke. A chasm lay between us and it, looking across which we could see a dry wall of rock receding away from the water and leaving a wide passage along which we could see from one end to the other. That looks like a cave of some sort, said Power. Can't we reach it? Not without jumping that chasm, I replied. A feat I, for one, am not going to attempt. Let us see what can be done from the top. It took us another hour to reach the summit, and once there we seemed no better off than before, for the water flung itself with a furious rush over the brow of the limestone cliff, while on each side the sheer face of the precipice precluded any idea of descending that way. There must be an entrance somewhere, I said. Let us set to work to find it. I then cut down a stout young sapling and began to lay about me with a will. Whatever are you doing? Knocking down the brushwood and trying to find the entrance, if there is one, to that cave. Nonsense! If there were a hole, you would have followed through it long ago, depend upon it. If there's any entrance at all from above, it's much farther away than this. With that, Power turned his back on me and disappeared among the rocks which covered the summit. Presently I heard him coo-wee. I answered, and following the direction of his voice, found him less than 100 yards away, and almost in a straight line from where we had been standing. Well, I asked, have you found anything? Yes, he replied, but I don't know how much it means. And he pointed to a blaze on a fallen ironbark tree by which he stood, under which a broad arrow pointed directly downwards. A government surveyor's mark, probably. I said, however, we'll see. Once again I set to work, beating down the brushwood with my sapling. It took some time to clear away the brushes that had grown up under and over the arc of the fallen tree. But at last it was done. Stooping down, I began a thorough examination of the place. Beginning at one end of the tree, I went carefully towards the other, thrusting my pole in all directions. When I had covered about 2/3 of the distance, I gave a sharp exclamation. "Give me the lantern!" I cried. "What is it?" asked Power, his voice trembling with excitement, as he hastily unslung and handed me a small bull's-eye lantern, which he carried, and for which, on account of the brilliance of the moon, we had hitherto found no use. "I'll tell you what I know myself," I answered, and taking the lantern, I flashed the light into the mouth of the great hole my attack on the shrubs had laid bare. Power, leaning over me and trying to peer into it. "That is the way down," he said. "Not a doubt of it," I returned. "Come along." Well, the heating is on. It's a cold night. Hope you guys are warm. "You're never going down there," he gasped. "Yes, I am. I'm going to see this thing through now that we've got so far." "Come on, you don't mean you're going to let me go down alone?" "Of course not," replied Power, pulling himself together. "But how are you going to get down? You don't know the depth of the hole." "Nope, but I'll soon find out." All the time I had been talking, I had been clearing the undergrowth from the mouth of the hole and thrusting my pole down to find, if possible, its depth. This I could not do, but struck by the fact that something hard projected at regular intervals from one side of the shaft, I concluded that the descent must have been made by a series of stakes driven into the earth. I verified this by leaning over the hole and thrusting my arm down till my knuckles came into contact with the first rung of the ladder, if it may be called so. I pointed this out to Power. "Well, what are you going to do now?" he asked. For answer, I laid my sapling across the mouth of the hole and, swinging myself into it, found, as I expected, that my feet rested on a second support about half my own length lower down. Another step, another, and another, and my feet touched ground so suddenly that I fell in a heap, with an involuntary shout. "Oh, are you all right, Will?" asked Power, anxiously from the top. "Yes, I think so, but pass the light down." Power tied his handkerchief to the strap of the lantern and lowered it down to me, joining me himself a moment later. "We're in for it now, Will," he said. "Yes," I replied, "we'll not go back, but the sapling may be useful." And, swinging myself up once more, I drew in the long staff, and planting it on the ground below, sprang again down to Power's side. He flashed the light hither and thither, and we could see that we stood at the beginning of a long and fairly broad passage, the extent of which we could not guess. "Listen," said Power. Suddenly, "What's that?" I'm not a very nervous man, but that startled ejaculation was somewhat trying in the circumstances, so I told Power. But I did hear something, Will, he said, apologetically. Of course you did, I replied, and it was only the waterfall. This was true, for we could distinctly hear the thunder of the water. I was leading with the lantern, and feeling doubtful of Power's nerves, I suggested leaving him behind and going on alone. How do you feel, Charles? I asked him. If you wait here, I'll go on by myself. This suggestion had the effect of bracing his nerves. Thank you, he replied. I don't feel very happy, I admit, but anything is better than being left here by myself. We can't see anything worse we've seen already. Go on. And we went forward, cautiously, till presently we were brought to a standstill by what seemed to be solid rocks barring our further progress. And we soon saw, however, that what appeared to be a complete wall was merely a partition between the passage in which we stood and another passage, or perhaps a cave, beyond. The communication was established by means of a natural archway, more than large enough to admit a man crawling on his hands and knees. Power went through first, while I guided his movements as well as I could with the lantern, and presently he called out, "Are you through?" I cried almost immediately behind him. "Yes," he answered, "and I found something, too." "What is it?" "I don't know exactly. It feels like a bundle of sticks tied together." As soon as I had crawled through, the lantern settled the question. What Power had found was a bundle of torches. "This decides one point," I exclaimed, drawing one out. "We're not the first to visit this mysterious place. Let's light a torch and see better where we are." The first few torches, being damp and moldy with age, refused to light, but at last I succeeded with two from the center of the bundle. We each took one, holding them high above our heads. For a moment we were dazzled, and then a wonderful sight met our eyes. We were in a vast limestone cavern. In front of us rose the grandest array of stalactites and stalagmites I ever saw, stretching away in innumerable aisles, as if it were the nave of some mighty cathedral. From the roof, between the great pillars, depended of the most exquisite tracery of quartz from prisms here, and the light from the torches was flashed back in many-colored waves. For a while we stood silent. At last Power said, in an awed voice, "We shall never see anything more marvelous than this." "Let us go on," I replied. And we had moved forward for perhaps 100 yards, the sound of the falling waters increasing at every step, when what was, as it were, the nave of the cathedral, with its rows of pillars, came to an abrupt end, and in front of us at right angles ran another row of columns resembling an exquisitely wrought choir screen. "Wonders will never cease," remarked Power. "It would really not surprise me to find an altar on the other side of that screen. Isn't it beautiful?" "Very," I replied, "and very annoying, too. It completely bars our way in this direction." "Perhaps there's an opening somewhere," he suggested, and moved off to the left. I took a few paces in the opposite direction and presently cried out, "Hello! You're right! Here's the opening. It's an artificial one." I pointed to a large and ragged hole in the screen. "Look at that. It's been smashed to pieces with a hammer, or some such instrument." "Not a doubt of it," Power agreed. "But it must have been broken long ago, for there are traces of a new formation in progress. What is beyond?" "Another cave." "Not so large," I replied, having already passed through the aperture. "And beyond that is the waterfall, not 60 feet away. There is nothing here. I could see all around. Let us— oh!" The exclamation was wrung from me by a sudden spasm of terror, which shook me from head to foot. I fell back against Power with such violence as nearly to upset him, and then clung to him, trembling. "Quick! Let's go back. Don't look. This is no place for us. Flesh and blood cannot stand any more," I gasped. "For heaven's sake, old man, what's the matter?" cried Power. "Here, drink this." He handed me his flask. Now the spirit revived me, and with a violent effort, I collected my wits again. "Take some yourself, Charles. I urged. You'll need it. And he did so. Tell me what it is, he demanded, holding my torch in my left hand. I pointed straight in front of me with my right. Power's eyes followed my finger. His torch dropped from his hand, and I flung my arm round him just to save him from falling. My God, he cried. How awful. And with that, let's take another little break. Yes? Shall we take another break with our other special, beautiful guest? Thank you for hanging with it. Thank you. And I'm going to eat a mint, because my voice is going sour.
Like sound, variety. This is a wonder of color.
quotidien, ces小仔會
When the leaves are dark and champion, decide where you wanna go. All these lessons I've been learning. When hood and start to show, I'm on it. Crying, I'll rise and I'll fall. Always as you are. I'll rise and I'll fall. Right back. Hey, right back. Hey, right back.
Okay, right? Every time. They're great. Every single time. These are New York bands, and if you are in New York, or if you're ever through New York at any time, if you are in New York, try to catch these guys. We got a little bit more to go. But remember, make sure you have your sweet beverage next to you. Make sure you got a little noshy nosh. So. My God, he cried. How awful. Immediately in front of us yawned an open grave. The earth flung up on either side of it had grown hard and caked in the years that had rolled by since first it was dug. and almost turned to stone by the ceaseless drip of water from the roof. At one end lay a pick and shovel carelessly cast aside, and at the other 2 fleshless, grinning skeletons, in such a position that they seemed to be peering into the grave beneath them. The light of the torches played on the ghastly forms, throwing flickering shadows upon them until they looked like a pair of mocking demons laughing into the nethermost pit. "Let's go!" cried Power. No, I said in an unsteady voice. "They can't harm us. They are dead enough. Let's examine the grave." "Not while they're keeping guard over it," protested Power. With one sweep of my sapling, I thrust back the ghastly pair, and they fell, crumbling into dust by the side of the grave. We then peered into the open shaft. Our torches drooped forward to throw in the light. And there in the grave were 2 forms that had once been human. The upper, a skeleton such as we had just removed, hid the form that lay below it, a form which, though emaciated and in the last stages of decay, preserved some lingering likeness to humanity. With a determined effort, I thrust forward my sapling when the hideous thing on top instantly fell, a crumbling ruin like the others. Leaning forward, we held the torches further into the grave. In one glance, we recognized the face of the man we had seen in the waterfall earlier that night. I scarcely think we were surprised, and when our first feeling of dread had passed away, the same thought struck us both simultaneously. Can we find the key to this mystery? "We can try," said Power. "Look, there's an old coat near the pick and shovel. Let's begin by searching it." The coat was fast falling to pieces, but had originally been of good material and make, such as to be worn by a man in easy circumstances. Inside the collar, though almost effaced, was the name of the maker, one of the principal tailors in Sydney. We looked at each other. "Skyland came from London and opened that shop about 7 years ago," said Power. "So this must have been left here within that time." "Evidently," I replied, feeling in the pockets. "But here's something which may prove more definite," and drawing out a small tin box about 3 inches square, I handed it to Power. "There's an inscription on it," he said, "but the torchlight flickers, so I can't make it out. Let's have the lantern." I turned the bullseye full on the lid of the box, and Power read out the inscription. It ran, "George Woodfall, Potts Point, Sydney." "George Woodfall!" exclaimed Power. "Why, he must have been murdered after all." With a great deal of difficulty, I forced open the lid and drew out from the box a small sheet of paper, a folded square. "Shall we read it now?" I asked. "Or wait till we get outside?" "Now!" answered Power eagerly. He had begun to unfold the paper, and after one glance at its contents, uttered a cry of surprise. "It's a confession," he said, and read on. "Yes," he repeated presently, "it's the confession of George Woodfall, who lived among us so long, beloved and respected. It is his own story of how he sinned and suffered." We read it together by the flickering light of our torches. The statement was short and to the point, giving few details, but setting forth a crime and the long mental agony endured by its unhappy perpetrator. In consequence, it was as follows. "At length I confess I am driven to make this statement of my crime, lest I go mad before it is done. 20 years ago I did it. 20 years ago on the 20th September, now close at hand, there were 3 of them, and I killed them all 3. It was for gold. We had been mates at the diggings and were coming up down to Sydney with our gold dust and nuggets. We had a good deal, more than enough to set each of us up, and a fortune for one. That's what tempted me. I don't know who they were, as each passed under some nickname, blackguards, all of them, and a rough lot. Well, I was what they call a gentleman. I thought I saw a chance to rebuild my fortunes with that gold, so I took it. I killed them in a cave we'd struck one day while prospecting. It was a damnable deed and black treachery. Whatever their crimes, they had always been good enough to me, letting me join their gang when first I came to the diggings and sharing fair and square and everything. And they were sleeping, too, when I robbed them of their treasure and their lives at the same time. At least, 2 of them were sleeping. The third awoke just as my knife was raised to strike him. He never said a word, but he hurled himself straight at me. And I caught his throat as he came and held on. I made sure he was dying before I loosed my grip and stooped to pick up my knife, which had been dropped at the struggle. I leant over to see if he was dead, but he had recovered and struggled into a sitting posture. His face was livid, his eyes protruded from his head and his tongue from his mouth. He could not speak, but he clasped his hands in prayer for mercy. I flung myself upon him and buried the knife in his heart. And as the breath left his body, he uttered a yell which seemed to echo for long minutes through the cave. It rings in my ears now, and will ring till my dying day. I began with much difficulty to dig, rather to hew out a grave, but at length desisted, reflecting that no one would be likely to discover the cave at so lonely and remote a spot, that even if it should be discovered, there would be nothing to connect me with the bodies of my victims. So I laid the corpses in a shallow pit I had excavated, and threw a few loose stones upon them. Thus I left them and came to Sydney with my ill-gotten gold. Here I was quite unknown, and for a time I kept quiet, giving out that I had recently arrived from England, and was on the lookout for a good investment for my small capital. At last the opportunity came. 1 week, I invested almost all I had in the Binnambura mine. The next, I found myself rolling in riches in the talk of the town. From that day, all I touched turned to gold. It seemed that I could not make a mistake. Of course, I kept my eyes open, but my luck was phenomenal. In the first flush of success, my excitement was so great that I almost forgot my crime. I went everywhere, did everything, and before the year was out, I had nearly persuaded myself that I had forgotten. And then something happened that warned me I should never forget. It was long past midnight, and I was sitting alone in the smoking room of the house on Potts Point. I had a house full of companions, wild, reckless fellows, but one by one they had dropped off to bed, and I was sitting alone at the open window looking out on the quiet waters of the bay. My thoughts were running in no particular direction. And as I sat, a wave of bitter regret suddenly rushed over me, and I felt I would have given all my wealth and even my life to free my hands from the stain of blood. Had I acted on that impulse, gone to the nearest magistrate, confessed my crime, and paid the penalty, might have saved myself an eternity of suffering. But I resisted, and the impulse passed, and my emotion, though transient, had been deep, and with a shaking hand, I mixed myself a stiff glass of brandy and water, which I drained at a gulp. The last vestige of my hesitation disappeared, and I turned to close the window. "Dead men tell no tales," I muttered, with my hand upon the sash, when, spoken as it were from the veranda, immediately below me, I heard the words, very softly uttered. "It is time. Let us begin." Burglars was my first thought. As I sprang back from the window and felt for my revolver, concealed behind the thick curtain, I waited their entrance, but no one came. At last I crept to the window and peered out, my finger on the trigger, and every nerve on the alert. Bright moonlight illuminated the veranda, the lawn, and all down the shrubberies to the water's edge, yet nothing was to be seen, nor did the faintest sound break the stillness of the night. "They have heard me and made off," I said to myself. Revolver in hand, I slipped through the window and made a tour of the gardens and the outhouses without finding anything for my pains. Returning to the house, I went in and, having closed the window, put out the lights, and as I turned to take up the bedroom candle, I started back with a cry of alarm, for a heavy body fell with a thud at my feet. Then, before I had time to recover myself or even to wonder what it could mean, sharp and sudden and terrible, arose a cry. And then, in a flash, all was clear to me. I staggered back into a chair and covered my face with my hands, but I could not shut out those awful sounds that echoed around me just as they had echoed in the cave on that fatal night. I knew it could not be long before the household was aroused, and that I should explain everything. So I sat and waited, for how long I do not know, until at last it was borne in on me that I alone could hear this devil's concert. With that thought, the sound ceased, and silence once more fell. Then, while still I could see nothing, I heard the voice of the man with whom I had had that desperate struggle. "George," said the voice, "you are growing forgetful. We are here to remind you that this day week will be the 20th of September." The tones of the voice were very low and very even. I could not answer, though I strove to speak. And presently the voice went on. "Your time has not come yet, George. Before it does, we will teach you to remember. Thursday will be the 20th. We shall expect you in the cave. You will come, will you not?" "Yes, I will come," I whispered. Then I knew no more. I need not go on. I kept the tryst, passed through a night of such agonizing horror that I wondered afterwards how I came to retain either life or reason after it. I have kept both, however, during 20 miserable years, and I am glad I've written this, for it has strengthened and comforted me, and maybe had I written it, had I spoken it earlier, I might have been forsaken by those awful things for which these 20 years have haunted me perpetually, never leaving me, and surely as the date comes round, forcing me on that dreadful pilgrimage to the scene of my crime, there to spend one long night of terror on the spot where once I fell. Now, something tells me the end is very near. One more pilgrimage will I make, because I must, to that spot of blood-stained memories, and when I return, I will give myself up and place this confession in responsible hands. Then it may be that my tortured soul shall find rest and peace at last. George Woodfall. We buried them all in one grave, and over them Power read the burial service from his prayer book. Then we had piled a can of quartz over them. We turned away and left. Note by the Reverend Charles Power. Two ideas strike me with such force that I cannot refrain from giving expression to them. In the first place, it's evident that George Woodfall never came back from that last miserable journey on which he set out shortly after writing his statement. Why was this? Was it that, going with his confession unmade, he was delivered into the power of the spirits of darkness? And in the second place, were not our steps guided to the cave that night in order that his confession might be found, so that his long tortured soul may find rest and peace at last? There you have it, The Restless Dead. What do you know? Happy Christmas. Happy Christmas Eve. I hope that you get all the toys and Legos and race cars that you are duly warned that you deserve everything. And all the beverages, may they flow unstoppingly upon your soul. No, really, have a good night, and thank you for watching. And, I don't know, what is this? What is this about? What is it? Good night. Happy Christmas.